Well, welcome back. I'm going to invite Anne. I think Anne's coming to read to us from Ezekiel. She's currently saying hello to someone. Excellent. We're in Ezekiel 34, which is on page 865 of the Bibles, and we're gonna have the whole chapter. So let's enjoy this as Anne brings it to us. There you go, Anne.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Lovely to see my family. I'm glad that James said where we were reading from. I didn't want to give him a heart attack tonight, as I nearly did with Wayne the other week when I started reading the wrong chapter. His face was a picture. So we're in Ezekiel. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have no strengthened the weak, or healed those who are ill, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they are scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered and has become food for all wild animals, and because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and I will no longer be food for them. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them, as a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them. So will I look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they are scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them out from the nations and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them into their own land. I will pasture them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines and in all the settlements in the land. I will tend them with good pasture, and the mountain heights of Israel will be their grazing land. Then they will lie down in good grazing land, and there they will feed in a rich pasture on mountains of Israel. I myself will tend my sheep and make them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. But the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. As for me, as for you, my flock, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will judge between one sheep and another, and between rams and goats. It is not enough for you to feed on the good pasture. Must you also trample the rest of your pasture with your feet? It is not enough for you to drink clear water. Must you also muddy the rest with your feet? Must my flock feed on what you have trampled and drink what you have muddied with your feet? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says to them. See, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep. Because you shove with flank and shoulder, butting all the weak sheep with your horns until you have driven them away, I will save my flock, and they will no longer be plundered. I will judge between one sheep and another. I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. He will tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. I will make a covenant of peace with them and rid the land of savage beasts, so that they may live in the wilderness and sleep in the forests in safety. I will make them and the places surrounding my hill a blessing. I will send down showers in seasons. There will be showers of blessings. The trees will yield their fruit, and the ground will yield its crops. The people will be secure in their land. They will know that I am the Lord when I break the bars of their yoke and rescue them from the hands of those who enslaved them. They will no longer be plundered by the nations, nor will wild animals devour them. They will live in safety, and no one will make them afraid. I will provide them a land renowned for its crops, and they will no longer be victims of famine in the land or bear the scorn of the nations. Then they will know that I, the Lord their God, am with them, and that they, the Israelites, are my people, declares the sovereign Lord. You are my sheep, the sheep of my pastures, and I am your God, declares the sovereign Lord. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Anne. And this evening I want to speak to you about the shepherd who comes for his sheep. But before we do that, I would love you to reach for a copy of the Bible if you haven't got it and turn to this passage. It starts on 865, page 865. Bibles are in the pews. It'd be really helpful if you had it open in front of you. It will enable you to engage in this next wee while. And I'm going to ask Esther just to put up on the screen the diagram. Okay, so this, you'll have seen this a couple of times before, maybe if you've been here. This diagram is called the Three Mountains of Prophecy. And essentially what this diagram attempts to explain is what's going on for the prophets in the time at which they are speaking out what we have now in the book of the prophets. Books of the prophets. So in this case, the prophet on the left-hand side is Ezekiel, and he's looking into the future, and what he sees is a picture. a kind of a scene emerging. And it's a bit like looking at a mountain range. He just sees the whole thing as one. But we have the benefit of having traversed some of that mountain range already, some of that future. And we've traversed through history that the first of those peaks is the immediate future of the people of Israel, and in this case, Judah. And we have seen what has happened in the person of Jesus. And we are awaiting the third horizon, which is the return of Jesus, when he comes and he makes all things new. And what that means is that when we look at passages like this, we can look at it and we can see, with the benefit of hindsight, which parts of this prophecy that Ezekiel sort of saw as one horizon have already been fulfilled. We can look at it with more depth and more meaning, and we can await certain things that are yet to come. So as you look at the text in front of you, you might, for example, look at moments like in verse 14. He says, "There they will lie down in good grazing land, and there they will feed in a rich pasture on the mountains of Israel." And you might think to yourself, oh, I know a mountain. And I know there was a cross on a mountain. And I know that I feed on the rich pasture of that mountain. Ezekiel couldn't see what I can see now, but we know as Christians that there is a mountain in Israel which enables us to feed well as Christians. Because you could look at that and go, well, hang on, they went back into the land and they weren't all that happy. So was this prophecy true? Well, it is actually fulfilled in Jesus. And so that's how, can you see, we sit in between the second and the third horizons, and we can look back and see, there's greater depth and meaning to this than maybe Ezekiel understood when he spoke it out. If you think about, for example, verse 27, the trees will yield their fruit, and the ground will yield its crops, and the people will be secure in the land. Well, they were never secure in the land, really, when they returned. They were always under someone else's rule. But we know that Jesus, when he was asked about whether he was going to return the kingdom to Israel, he was really clear that this was never really about land. This was about a kingdom that he was bringing. And we, because of him, can be secure in that kingdom. Yes? Yes? So we must never forget this kind of image, this kind of diagram when it comes to thinking about the prophets, because otherwise we'll look at it and go, well, hang on, that never was actually fulfilled if we read it without reading it through the cross of Christ. Yes? Does that make sense? Are we there? Yes? Yes, good. Okay, so with that in mind, we're just going to understand a little bit about what it means for there to be a shepherd who comes for his sheep. A shepherd who comes for his sheep. So today, we're discovering more of the heart of God. Last week in Ezekiel 33, we got to the turning point in the book. Jerusalem has fallen, the city has collapsed, the temple is gone, and the people are in exile. And God is calling to them and he says, turn, turn, not in anger, but in mercy. And then we saw that just as Jerusalem fell so that they could experience the consequence of their sin in exile, so Jesus ultimately falls under God's judgment so that the consequence of our sin can be on him, so that we can experience the homecoming reconciliation of God. That's Ezekiel 33, but then Ezekiel 34 asks a different question. Ezekiel is asking, if Jerusalem has fallen, if the leaders have failed, if the people are scattered, if everything has gone wrong, then who will gather the people back together? And of course the answer is, yes, it is. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes explaining how the answer is Jesus, how Ezekiel knew it, and what Ezekiel's understanding of it helps us as we look at it from our perspective in history. So Ezekiel 34 gives us one of the most beautiful answers in the New Testament. God says, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. I will rescue my flock, he says in verse 10. That's the heart of the chapter. The leaders of Israel have been bad shepherds, but God himself will come to be their shepherd. And so here are 3 take-homes for what it means for God, what it means for the shepherd who comes for his sheep. So the first thing is, when shepherds feed themselves, the sheep scatter. So when shepherds feed themselves, the sheep scatter. That's the first section of this chapter. It begins with a word of judgment against the shepherds of Israel. So he's not thinking about actual shepherds. It's metaphorical language to deal with kings, priests, princes, rulers, and those who had responsibility in the life of the nation. And God's accusation is devastating. They've fed themselves. They've not fed the flock. They've taken the milk. They've worn the wool. They've slaughtered the choice animals. They've not strengthened the weak. They've not healed the sick. They've not bound up the injured. They've not brought back the strays. And they've not searched for the lost. In other words, the shepherds have used the sheep for their own benefit. They've taken the benefits of leadership but not loved. And the result is that the sheep are scattered. The sheep are not just a bit disappointed. They're not just mildly inconvenienced. They are scattered. And the thing that makes this so painful is that the people who were meant to protect them have become part of the danger. That may be a story of betrayal with which we might ourselves be familiar from some parts of our lives, that the people who were meant to protect us have actually become part of the danger. Now, it's very easy for us to read a chapter like this and apply it to someone else. And we can think about bad politicians, corrupt leaders, church leaders who've been in scandals. And of course, there are moments when the application is right. But this is a word to anyone who carries any responsibility and care for others, whether that is people like me or people like you, people who are teachers, parents, employers, anyone with influence. If we only apply this to other people, we will miss what God might want to say to us. Because the heart of bad shepherding is not just being in an official role, doing obvious damage. The heart of bad shepherding is using people to feed ourselves. It's using people to feed ourselves. This is really about the source of our motivation. What's going on in the way we relate. A couple of months ago, I said to our youngest son, I don't really like animated stuff. It's not really my thing. And he kind of looked at me like I had rejected him. And I thought, ooh, that's a bad thing for a dad to say. So I fairly swiftly said, well, what should we watch together? And you can show me. I wish it had been a bit swifter, but anyway. So we watched this TV series called Arcane. Has anyone watched Arcane? Yeah, a few nods. Okay, so it's a 3D animation, and it's brilliant. And essentially, it's a story. No spoilers here, don't worry. It's a story about 2 worlds that are juxtapositioned. And those 2 worlds essentially have 2 different sources of energy that rule the worlds that they rule those worlds. One is called Hextech in the land of Piltover, and the other is Shimmer in the underground city of Zorn. And I'm not all the way through, but it's very good. My limited understanding of it is that both of those sources of power are understood to be powerful and destructive. And there's a question about whether Hextech in particular can heal, or it just amplifies what is already there. Can it heal, or does it just amplify what is already there? So there's a theme that runs through it around the ethics of these powers. What's going on as they use them? Is it for domination? Is it for progress? Or is it for healing? And it's a compelling story for lots of reasons, but I find it deeply compelling because it tells us something about humanity. Watching it throws a spotlight on our motivations. And it's throwing a spotlight on my motivations. And that's what's happening here in Ezekiel's prophetic word about false shepherds. Is this about us pleasing ourselves or about pleasing God? When we're faced with we're engaged in a pastoral relationship where we are caring, are we caring to make ourselves feel better, or are we caring for the glory of God? And the truth is that if we don't get that right, that if we don't confess where we have got it wrong underneath, all that will happen is what's not right will get amplified. So where it becomes about us and our need, that will just grow and grow and grow, the more influence we have. So we need to be really careful. Are we engaging for love, for approval, or from love? Are we engaging for love, for approval, or from love? Is how we engage an overflow of what God is doing on the inside. And it can happen in leadership when ministry becomes about my importance, my reputation, my need to be needed, my need to be liked, my desire to control things, my fear of losing influence. It can happen in all types of places, in church, in families, in work, in friendships. Are we feeding on the love of others, or are we feeding on the love of God? And if we eat the approval of others, then we're no different to the shepherds of Israel who fed themselves. And what will happen eventually is the sheep will scatter, because they will discover that we're not safe. Because ultimately, they are what we are feeding on. And we're not to be trusted. When shepherds feed themselves, the sheep scatter. So that's the first thing about what it means for God to come as shepherd. The second is that when God does not abandon scattered sheep. So the judgment on the shepherds is severe, but it is not at the end of the chapter, because from verse 11, God begins to speak about what he himself will do. And the language is beautiful. I myself will search for my sheep. I myself will look after them. I will rescue them. I will bring them out. I will pasture them. I will bind up the injured. This is the language of a shepherd who cares. This is the heart of God. He does not look at scattered sheep and say, well, they should have known better. He looks at them with love. He doesn't say they should have been stronger or they can find their own way back. I myself will search for them. This is not how religious people often understand God. We can easily imagine God waiting for people to get themselves together, waiting for people to sort themselves out. You know, when you're ready, whenever you're ready. But Ezekiel 34 gives us a different picture. God goes looking. The sheep are lost and God searches. He's not passive. He's not distant. He comes for his people. And this is the story of the Bible. In Eden, after Adam and Eve sinned, God comes looking for them. Where are you? In Exodus, when the Israelites are enslaved, God hears their cry and comes down to rescue them. In Luke 15, we hear Jesus talking about the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son, and the shepherd who leaves the 99 and goes after the one that is lost until he finds it. The first movement is God's. Now, this leads us to the question of, well, who are the lost sheep today? What we've got to remember is that this was spoken to a covenant people, and we look at this through the lens of the cross. And so we understand now that where God looked at the lost sheep of the people of Israel, what we understand on the other side of the cross is that God's invitation to come home, to restoration, to relationship with him, is an invitation that has been made to everyone. So Jesus sends the disciples out into all nations so that they might show people what it means to follow him and they might be saved. And so when we look at this on the other side of the cross, we see that God's heart is not just for the sheep of Israel in this setting, it is for the whole of creation. He wants everyone to come back into relationship with him. So the exact parallel of this passage would today be the church leading badly. So that's the bad shepherding, the church leading badly, and the world not as a result, the world missing the invitation to come home. So where the scattered sheep of Israel don't get to hear the invitation to come back into covenant relationship with God. And God says, I'll go and find them myself. Now, it's the church leading badly and not getting the good news of Jesus to God's world, so that people don't hear the invitation to come home. Coming home is a phrase that will be sung quite a bit in the next couple of weeks around the theme of football, and which shows us something deeper about that song, Football's Coming Home, tells us about identity and belonging being held together, a great desire for something to come back that tells us that maybe we were right in the first place, or that we own this thing. About 10 years ago, there's a Roman Catholic cardinal who said at an Alpha conference that when asked the question, what would God say to today's world? He simply said, he would say, come home. And what he said very simply was a way of just identifying that invitation of God that comes in this passage, but that speaks about how identity and belonging are things that we long for deeply and God wants to bring to us. It speaks of a God who searches, gathers, and protects. And so a question comes to us this evening: are we coming home? Are we coming home? Is the orientation of our hearts towards God? And is there momentum towards him? Or have we been distracted along the way? And the third thing I want to bring to us this evening is simply that Jesus is the Good Shepherd. So the one that Ezekiel is looking for, he's kind of looking at this mountain range, seeing the future, and he sees one like he refers to as David. Verse 23, I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. He will tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. And in those verses, he's looking into the future and he can't quite see, but now we know that Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. So the one Ezekiel was prophesying, the one he was pointing to ultimately, we know to be Jesus. This isn't, David had been dead for centuries when this was spoken. So Jesus is the new David. Jesus is the good shepherd. Now, one of the things we've got to kind of get our heads around at this moment is the language of sheep and shepherds, and it kind of turns up in different places. So I'm just going to do a little kind of glossary for you. So let's just remember that in the sheep-related terminology, as it turns up in the New Testament, we have Jesus saying, I am the good shepherd, but the one who's the good shepherd is also the Lamb of God who was slain for us. So another bit of sheep-related terminology, that he's not just the one who cares, but ultimately the way that he expresses his care is to lay himself down for us and to die in our place. And in that moment, the sacrificial language of the temple comes out and expresses Jesus as the ultimate sacrifice, the Lamb of God who was slain for us. So he's both a shepherd and a lamb, and he invites us to be his sheep. But it's also true that there are sheep and goats, because Jesus tells a parable about sheep and goats. And he talks about the fact that he will judge, and he will judge between the sheep and the goats. And as Ruth reminded us in the prayer meeting beforehand, we can tell the difference between sheep and goats because of what they look like. In other cultures, they look exactly the same. It's according to where their tail is pointing that they can be identified. And so there are sheep and there are goats. And so when we think about the calling of God to call everyone home to relationship with him, I might think to myself, I'm one of his sheep because I know his name. And I might think that somebody else might go, well, I'm not one of his sheep. And that might be a point at which they self-identify as a goat. I mean, they might not say themselves as a goat, but you know what I mean. As in, like, so there's sheep, there's a shepherd, there's a lamb, there's sheep, there's goats. And then there's wolves in sheep's clothing, which is complicated as well. So there's wolves who come dressed as sheep, and they cause damage. And so there's kind of an echo there of the danger of false shepherds today. All of that is to say that whenever somebody like me is appointed to a pastoral role as a shepherd, or whenever you feel that you've been appointed to a pastoral role and have a shepherding responsibility, we never stop being sheep. We never stop being sheep, because this passage points us to the one true shepherd. And when we take our eyes off the fact that we're sheep and pretend that we're shepherds, we lose connection. We lose our understanding of what it means for us to be saved by grace through faith. And we very swiftly begin to build up our identity in the works that we do as shepherds in caring for people. So that might be you're serving in a particular part of the life of the church, and you get home after church and you go, well, I did really well at that today. I'm feeling good about myself because I did that really well. I read that passage really well, or I led that Bible study really well, or I cared for those people really well. And just over a few weeks, you'll find that you're building your identity in your works, and you're building up your CV of how good a shepherd you are, and you're taking your eyes off who the one true shepherd is. And it's not that we don't want to learn what it means to be good shepherds. It's that we want to understand who the shepherd is and never take our eyes off what he has done for us. As we come into land, last week I told a story about how in South Sudan I asked a bishop about his ambush, and it left me sleepless for a night. If you haven't heard that story, do watch last week's talk. It's available on YouTube and other podcasting apps. But what I didn't say at that moment was that the reason the bishop was ambushed was because the guys who were ambushing him thought it was a different bishop. They thought Bishop Data was actually another guy called Bishop Elias. And the other guy, Bishop Elias, isn't actually really a bishop. He's an army commander who wanders round wearing bishop's clothing. I'll let you draw your conclusions about what that might mean in terms of sheep analogy and terminology. But he wanders around in bishop's clothing essentially as a cover-up for what's really going on underneath. And so Bishop Data, when he was ambushed, said, "Why are you ambushing me?" And they said, "Well, we were going for Bishop Elias." He said, "Well, you could see the logo on my side of the car. It's not his. Why have you got me?" And Bishop Data, they didn't let him go, but he continued in his ministry to them. He continued to share the gospel with the people who had kidnapped him, and give them the hope of Jesus. And when asked in the car as we were driving around why he still does it, he would say, because this is what it means to follow Jesus. That if I die driving these roads, it's because he's called me to drive these roads. So that's what I'm going to do. Friends, I use that illustration because I think there's something in that illustration for us, and when we think about what it means for us to be followers of a good shepherd in the culture in which we live. We may not have dangerous roads, but we may need to take dangerous paths in conversations with colleagues, family, or friends, not for the sake of conflict or defending the truth, but for the sake of scattered sheep, for the sake of people who don't know Jesus. We may have to take dangerous paths in order for them to know Jesus. We may have to say things that shock people into an understanding of what it means to know and love Jesus, because the culture is set against what it is to believe in the one true shepherd. So saying the thing that actually provokes people to think about Jesus may feel risky. So you may not be ambushed by Sudanese soldiers on the road, but you may be taking a dangerous path. And so I guess the question then is, are we self-serving? Are we like the shepherd who feeds on his sheep? Or are we willing to keep our eyes fixed on the good shepherd, the one true shepherd? Remember that we're sheep and follow him. Amen. Let's just for a moment pray. We're going to move from here to communion.